Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. David Haines was a longtime British aid worker beheaded by ISIS this week with video cameras rolling. It was yet another gruesome, calculated demonstration of the reality of evil. Haines had been kidnapped in Syria in March 2013. His resume of achievements in helping a variety of aid organizations over the last decade is extremely impressive. That the Islamic State would murder this man of peace in such a brutal way points again to the evil inherent in their belief system and in themselves. This man did not come to the Middle East to fight, but to help. The beheading and the video were a warning to any nation that considers aiding the United States' efforts against ISIS. It was titled, "A Message to the Allies of America." With his London accent, the executioner, who has come to be known as Jihadi John, directly addressed British Prime Minister David Cameron.
This British man has to pay the price for your promise, Cameron, to arm the Peshmerga against the Islamic State. Your evil alliance with America will only accelerate your destruction, and playing the role of the obedient lapdog, Cameron, will only drag you and your people into another bloody and unwinnable war.
The video concludes with the executioner standing over another man dressed in orange and kneeling. His name is Alan Henning, another British subject and aid worker. The executioner says,
"If you, Cameron, persist in fighting the Islamic State, then you, like your master Obama, will have the blood of your people on your hands."
Like his predecessors, James Foley and Stephen Sutloff, Haines was not a member of the military. He was not a spy for Western powers. This father of two was simply a man doing his part to help people in desperate need. British Prime Minister David Cameron responded to the video.
They boast of their brutality. They claim to do this in the name of Islam. That is nonsense. Islam is a religion of peace. They are not Muslims, they are monsters.
His statement reminded me of President George W. Bush. 6 days after 9/11, Bush spoke at the Islamic Center of Washington, D.C. He said, "The face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace." That was not just diplomatic speak. He meant every word, and it became the heart of the Bush foreign policy. He was certain if we could just get rid of the Taliban in Afghanistan and Saddam Hussein in Iraq and set up democratic governments for those two nations, then the basic goodness of the Islamic faith and the Muslim people would assert themselves. He saw Islam as very much like Christianity. I warned at the time that President Bush was tragically wrong. True Islam is spelled out in the Quran and the actions of Muhammad recorded in the Hadith. It is anything but a religion of peace. Allah demands that Muslims follow the Quran literally and without question. Last week in Washington, President Barack Obama spoke of the Islamic State, which he usually refers to as ISIL. He said, "ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents, and the vast majority of ISIL's victims have been Muslim." He apparently means it's not Islamic in some vague spiritual sense, but it's simply not true. It's wishful thinking. In every measurable way, ISIS is Islamic. It consistently reflects the hard fundamental teachings of the Quran, the Hadith, and the severe example of Muhammad's own life. The I in ISIS really does stand for Islam. Will they let Christians and Jews join the organization? Of course not. When they take over a community, do they set up secular systems of laws? No. They immediately impose Sharia law. Yes, they're monsters, but they're also Muslims. We must keep in mind this fact. Not all Muslims are terrorists, but virtually all terrorists are Muslims. Why is that? That's something you need to ask yourself. President Obama says that they can't be Islamic because the majority of their victims are Muslims. Jack the Ripper's victims were all English. Does that mean he wasn't English? Killers kill whatever victim they find at hand. Gary Bauer of the Campaign for Working Families said, "The reason the overwhelming majority of victims have been Muslim is a matter of geography. ISIL operates in a predominantly Muslim region for now. If ISIL, Hamas, and Hezbollah ever get to Israel, the great majority of their victims will be Jews. Their purpose in killing fellow Muslims again fits in with the teaching from the Quran and the Hadith. They kill those that they consider apostates, just as their religion dictates. Millions of Muslims believe that theirs is a religion of peace because, like some Christians, they haven't really looked closely at their own founding documents of their faith. I don't expect presidents to be as plain spoken about Islam as someone like myself, a Christian minister. Part of my job is to contrast other belief systems with that of the gospel and show as much as humanly possible the infinite superiority of Jesus and his word. But I do expect them to be realistic in their assessment of Islam. It's not their job to contrast Islam and Christianity, but neither is it their job to commingle the two. Most of the world puts a smiley face on religion. It teaches that all religion is basically good. The sugar-coated world of political correctness is not always the real world at all. And when government's policy is based on PC instead of real facts, that government and its people are in real trouble. Political correctness seeps into everything. Earlier I mentioned Iraq and Afghanistan and the harvest of pain reaped from the Bush administration's politically correct, wrong-headed attitude toward Islam. You would think that America would take those painful lessons to heart, but we don't seem to have learned a thing. In his major address to the nation last week, President Obama again put his faith in what he believes are moderate Muslims. The family of beheaded journalist Steven Sotloff says he was not captured by ISIS, but by the so-called moderate rebels. Who then sold him to ISIS? Family spokesman Barack Barfi said, "We believe these so-called moderate rebels that people want our administration to support, one of them sold him probably for something between $25,000 and $50,000. The president appears to be building the American strategy for dealing with ISIS on the idea of arming the moderate rebels to help us fight ISIS in Syria. The day after his announcement, the moderate rebels in whom President Obama had just publicly placed his faith agreed to a non-aggression pact with ISIS. In essence, they publicly declared that they will not fight or oppose ISIS. That agreement may or may not hold, but it shows the shaky ground on which we walk. Folks, we might as well build our ISIS policy on Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. The moderates we're looking for just don't exist. Hillary Clinton also believes in the moderate Muslim rebel myth. On this program, in the past, I've applauded President Obama for not giving in to pressure from those who believe this myth. That's all changed now. In his September 10th speech, he made not only their existence, but also their reliability a cornerstone of his ISIS strategy. By saying that we can trust them now, he's admitting to a fundamental error in judgment then. If the rebels really were the good guy alternatives to Assad and ISIS, then he could have armed them 2 years ago, and today we wouldn't be dealing with Assad or ISIS. But the moderates were an illusion then, and they're still an illusion today. Bashar al-Assad is a wicked man, but the American nation cannot correct all wrongs, and it cannot govern the earth. Assad may be wicked, but he is not ISIS. And he is the head of a state that needs to maintain some sort of acceptance among the nations of the world, unlike ISIS, who believe that the more brutal and barbaric it behaves, the more it pleases Allah. In 1936, with the Spanish Civil War raging, a nationalist commander named Emilio Mola led his troops toward Madrid. During a radio broadcast, he said that he had 4 columns of soldiers and that sympathizers within the city made up a 5th column, which would rise up as they entered the city. Ernest Hemingway, in Madrid at the time, wrote a play with that title, and ever since then, the term 5th column has meant people within a city, nation, or group who are working on the side of the force that is attacking that city, nation, or group. Radical Islam has 5th columns in various countries around the world. You may remember me saying that our ally, Jordan, harbors a vast 5th column ready to rise up within that nation if ISIS ever attacks from without. That may seem surprising because Jordan is considered one of the most moderate Muslim countries on earth and a great friend to the United States. It is highly representative of so-called moderate Islam. The U.S. counts Jordan and its King Abdullah as one of our most dependable Middle Eastern allies. But a 2007 Pew Research poll showed that 72% of Jordanians approved of attacks against the United States military in Iraq, and only 12% disapproved. 62% of Jordanians approved of some or all Muslim groups that attacked the United States. A more recent 2013 poll shows that 39% of Jordanians view Hamas favorably, while 11% admit having a favorable view of al-Qaeda. These are our friends, the moderates. World events are not usually driven by the silent majority, but by the passionate minority. Shia Muslims represent a solid majority among Muslims in Iraq. But even with the resources of a nation and with troops trained and equipped by the United States, those Shias have lost vast portions of their country to the Sunni Muslims organization, ISIS. They're holding on to what's left only with help from the United States. The difference is the passion, the heart, even the ruthlessness with which ISIS is willing to operate. Last year, Pew Research ran a poll of 11 Muslim countries. It revealed that 30% of the Muslims are on the fence regarding al-Qaeda, and 13% of Muslims in these countries have a favorable view of al-Qaeda. That may not sound like much, but consider this. There are 1.6 billion Muslims on earth. If 13% see al-Qaeda favorably, that's 208 million people. That's a gigantic 5th column, and it's global. Recently, President Obama said 6 words that made instant headlines around the world. We don't have a strategy yet. The next day, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest tried to defend Obama by saying the president hasn't yet laid out a specific plan for military action in Syria. Sympathetic analysts in the mainstream media insisted that he didn't mean he had no strategy for ISIS. It was only a reference to actually bombing Syria. But even a cursory reading of the president's remarks that day proved that he wasn't just talking about military action in Syria. He was talking about dealing with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, 2 places it presently exists. In his speech to the nation a few days later, the president emphasized that he now had a strategy.
And we're moving ahead